Well, it's good to see you all this evening. I appreciate your interest in overseas evangelism. I appreciate the singing of the song, Send the Light. It seems like so many of my journeys in the past, the places I've arranged to preach and teach, have been churches of Christ, or groups of people who are already Christians. Probably the thing is that's different about this trip. Many of the opportunities we had to sit down and talk to people, they were not Christians. They were people who were learning English by studying the Bible. And so they were getting some exposure to the Bible, but they were not already Christians. So we really did have a chance to send the light. The trip was to Turkey and Ukraine, and you notice in the lower left-hand corner it says that Leah and Justin Hopkins were along on this trip. And most of you know most of the trips that I take alone. This time it was nice to have Justin and Leah. I've really known Justin back beginning in the late 90s. He began to attend there at Buda while I was preaching there, so I got to know him. He was one of the little kids, which he's certainly not anymore. We've been associated with him with this congregation for several years. He began publishing our lectureship books back in 2015, and he runs Azimuth Media, and they just do a really good job in terms of printing quality and all of those things. And both Justin and Leah write and publish Christian literature. I have a slide on getting there because this year, getting there was part of the challenge. It's always a challenge to try to find places that I can go and they will accept me and let me preach and teach and find a contact that's there. This year was just extremely difficult. We decided to go ahead and try to make a trip, even though with the COVID situation we knew it was going to be challenging. Let me just say, at first we were going to go to Minsk in Belarus. If you haven't noticed, there are very few countries in the world that will allow Americans to land there. I guess we came off early as one of the red countries that had a lot of COVID, and there are many places you just can't go. Or if you go, you're going to have a 10-day, 14-day quarantine once you get there. Well, we thought we found a place to go in Belarus. Well, Belarus had a 10-day quarantine. Well, you're in the hotel, maybe people talk to them through the glass. Belarus, if you went there during that 10-day quarantine, you could not leave the country. And it kind of took us a while to figure out that little complexity. So we scratched Belarus off the list. And really, Turkey, very grateful for Turkey. Turkey would allow Americans to come directly there. And I do mean directly. If we stopped for one of the usual plane changes, perhaps in Amsterdam or Frankfurt, once you stopped in some European country, you were tainted with that country. And if you got to Turkey, then you had the long-term quarantine and things like that. So I think it was really Justin. Credit to Justin. He says, Stan, I think if we take a non-stop to Istanbul, we'll be okay. And we were. And of course, not only working out airline reservation schedules, but the COVID schedules. The U.S., you have to have a COVID test within 3 days. And by 3 days, they mean like parts of 3 days. In Turkey, it's 72 hours. 72 hours exactly. You have to have the COVID test within 72 hours of the time that you get on the plane to go to Turkey. And that turned out to be very difficult in trying to work the reservations that we had. We wound up taking 3 tests while we were gone. One was to get us into Turkey. The second one, we were able to time it right, so it not only got us into the Ukraine, but it got us back into Turkey. And then there was the one we needed to take to get home. But grateful for the opportunities that we had, and we were able to teach people in Istanbul, in Kyiv, and really several other places in Turkey. Istanbul, a bit of geography in the beginning, kind of a unique city in the world. It's one city that's on 2 continents. That strait of water there separates Europe from Asia. And the Bosphorus Strait divides Europe and Asia. Istanbul, you may remember Byzantium or Constantinople, and now it's Istanbul. It's one of the largest cities in the world. Just for a point of reference, it's about 10 times the size of San Antonio. That, we are grateful to say, was kind of our entry point to being able to do this journey. Now, I tried to show you kind of where we were. We came into Istanbul. First thing we did was go west in Turkey to some of the places there. And then we went up to Kyiv in the Ukraine. And then we went down the coast of Turkey, which is where so many of those cities that you read about in Revelation are found. So that was kind of the overall plan. So first thing we went east in Turkey. Going east in Turkey is kind of amazing. Going east in Turkey is like going backwards in time. We went to Smyrna. We had a guide, Sharif Yenin, and you see the name there. One of the hotels recommended to us. He was just excellent. And one place we visited was Haran. You remember that as the place that Abraham stopped over as he was going from Ur to the Promised Land. It's amazing. The city is there, it continues to exist. There are some relics, evidently from the days of Abraham, as I'll mention in a minute. It's kind of hard to associate, say anything specifically with him. Another place in western Turkey, in eastern Turkey, was Göbekli Tepe. And I heard about that 4 or 5 years ago watching something on the National Geographic Channel. It's a very old place. Some people claim it is time zero, that it is the oldest discovered place in the world. Now, we can go through the whole discussion about how you date things, and do you really believe in carbon dating and all of that. But by all accounts, it's old. Some say it's the oldest temple in the world. It's hard for me to see kind of what's there that makes them think it's a temple, but it's definitely an old place. I brought you a few pictures. They really only begun to investigate this seriously. I think they found it in the 1970s. Only begun to investigate it since the 1990s. Why, you may say, something this old, something this important? I will tell you, in your lifetime, you will hear a lot about this place. It is so little is understood. They've only excavated about 5% of it. And among all accounts, it is old. But they've done the scan of the area. There are 20 circular sites. And there's a picture of one of the circular sites. One of the circular sites right there. And if you see these little stones, they kind of outline the circle. And then there are 2 taller ones in the middle. This, they're definitely sure, is thousands of years older than Stonehenge, thousands of years older than the pyramids in Egypt. It may very well date back to the time of the flood. Some would claim it's 12,000 years old. And I talked to our guide about that, and I said, I'm not necessarily a big fan of carbon dating. And to my surprise, this secular guy said he really wasn't either. So, how old is it? I don't know. It's old. And it's probably older than anything else they have found on Earth. I tried to kind of show you, this is one of the circles, and there are these kind of, see these stones that are kind of shaped like a 7? They line the whole area. And in the middle are these stones that are kind of T-shaped. Well, and they're taller. And I saw those and I thought, well, somebody's leaning straw on top of it to make a covering for the whole thing. They just don't know what they found. I think there's so much more research. I think they need to compare what they found here with things that they found in other parts of the world. It kind of was mysteriously filled in with dirt. And I thought, was it there before the flood? The flood could fill in a lot of things with dirt. I don't know. I just think in biblical history, my gut tells me that in biblical history, this is going to be one of the things that brings people back to the history that's found in the Bible. Because this may very well date back to the time of the flood. There are carvings there. Look at the carvings. If you can see detailed carvings of animals. And more unusual than that, they have 3-dimensional carvings of animals. Can you see that? I don't know what it is. Some sort of animal crawling down something. 3-dimensional carvings of animals. And something that they believe may go back 10,000, 12,000 years. Now this right here, it's a representation in a way of a man. Trust me. This right here is the arm. How do I know that's an arm? Because if you look with the magnifying glass, it's got fingers on the end of it. This thing right here is carvings that looks like it would have been the belt. And on the front side of this thing are things that maybe think you may make up a face. So these, it's just really intriguing. When I first saw the animals in these pin-like structures, my thought was, this was a staging area for the ark. They put the animals in there, and how did they know which ones went in which pin? Because they had a drawing of it. I've kind of backed off of that. I don't know what to think, but I'm in good company, because nobody else knows what to think either. But I just thought that was fascinating. Ever since I saw that program, it just kind of stuck in my mind. And when we were going, when somebody mentioned this, go back to Tukey, I thought, could that have been what it was? So I went to my Google map, and when I find something on a program that's of interest, I mark a spot on my Google Maps. Go back to Tukey was marked on my Google Maps. So I don't know. Just keep that in mind. Go. In fact, if you will note the name of our guide, Serif, S-E-R-I-F, he's got 2 videos on there that talk about these things. Again, he's not a member of the church. I don't think he'd call himself a Christian, but he's fairly open-minded in the things that he looks at. I'll talk more about him in a minute. We went to Haran, where Abraham was. That's where Abraham stopped on his way from Ur on to Canaan. There's stuff there that was probably there in the days of Abraham. And the comments on Facebook, somebody said, oh, go to a spot where Abraham was and take a picture. Well, I'd love to do that. But there's not really a spot that you can say, okay, Abraham was here, he stood here, he slept here, he ate here. But that's the place. And there is stuff still there that was there during the days of Abraham. So, one more thing here. I don't know that this relates to the Bible, but I thought this was kind of fascinating. In that area, in Urfa, sadly Urfa is the name of the modern city that's there. That's the one we flew into. Urfa. This is the oldest known life-size statue to still be in existence into the present. In the world, the oldest one. Unearthed mid-90s below the old city of Urfa, in the area of a large pre-pottery Neolithic settlement. Yeah, I need a geologist. I learned as I went along, pre-pottery is important to them. And I think the logic is this. If people were able to make pots, they would have made pots and used pots. Pots are useful, what can I say? So if they find an area and they don't find any pot fragments, the Bible talks about pot shards. I mean, you're in biblical time. If they find an area that's got no pot shards, they assume pottery wasn't there, therefore they assume that area was pre-pottery, and that is old. The limestone, 1.8 meters tall, the eye sockets were filled with black obsidian. And some member of this congregation began to write a dissertation right there on my Facebook page about obsidian. And it's interesting. It's a stone, but it is a stone that is so hard and has such qualities that even today many people make surgical knives out of that as opposed to steel. That's how good it is. And this is what was in that guy, oldest full-size statue. I started to say a while ago, and I got lost. Why was it in the 1990s they began to discover these things? They were going to put in some dams in the area and make lakes. And I guess somewhere along the line, somebody said, maybe we ought to look around under this area we're about to cover up with water. There might be some interesting stuff there. And there was. Again, these big circular things. I think they only found that they scanned the area with some sort of, penetration radar or whatever. There are 20 of those there, and they've only uncovered 4 or 5. There is so much more to be done, but a lot of that was discovered because they were building dams in the area. They realized the area that was going to be flooded was going to be important. But this person, I just understand. And again, what does that tell us? That tells us that area is old. And why is that intriguing to me? Because that's where the Bible says some of the very first people were. I've commented before, Ur the Chaldees going up into Haran and over into Canaan, that big area. What do our history books call that? The Fertile Crescent. That's where they believe, that's where the most secular among us believe, that's where the earliest life existed on the earth. And we sit back and we just smile and say, well, that's what the Bible said all along. Welcome to the party. You're late to the party, but welcome to the party. And our guide, he showed us Haran and other places. And he was a guide just for the 3 of us. It was terrific. But what we found is he told the stories, as the guide would tell, of what went on in this area and who was involved and where it was. it was an interesting kind of a hodgepodge. He would mention the name of somebody we might recognize out of the Bible, but then he would tell a story that was really a different Bible character. And then he would tell an additional story about that, and it was a different Bible character. So we began to, and again, this guy was very nice. I had spoken to him on the phone several times before we went over there. But he's listened, and it was kind of almost amusing. Then, as things went on, after he would tell one of these stories, he would kind of look over at us like, well, is that right? you want to give me the Bible version of that? And I think our testimony to his open-mindedness. We took 10 flash drives with us, and on those flash drives were the church lectures, which have what? Commentaries on Genesis and all of that. So anyhow, we decided we had enough conversation with him to give one of them to him, and I thought, man, how important is this going to be to a guy? He's busy. He's trying to recover his business after the COVID year. But I was corresponding with him later. And later he wrote, by the way, the information on the USB is very valuable. Thanks a lot. Unexpected opportunities. I tell you, in trying to contact people or persuade people, sometimes I think you just get out in the boat and row. Sometimes, Lord, I'm going down this path. If there's somebody down that path that needs to find me, help them find me. Maybe this guy was one of those. So, after we went that direction, into the ancient part of the world over in eastern Turkey, we went back to Istanbul, and then we went north up to Kyiv. I included a picture of this. This was about a half a block from our hotel. Kyiv has got a number of beautiful buildings, and we were there and we got there late. So I wanted to get out and walk around because when I figured out these buildings are pretty in the daytime, they're even prettier at night. Ukraine, 7th largest city in Europe, about 3 million people. Now, how did we find those contacts? It was long enough ago, I've kind of forgotten. Somehow I got the name of this man in Donetsk. If you have the country of Ukraine, Kyiv is up there. There is an area right here by the city of Donetsk that the Russians have taken over. They control it. The Christians that exist in that part of the world are in great trouble. And this guy is a preacher that was there. And he was going to come up to Kyiv to meet us, and he went up there in February, the first time we were planning to go up there. He has family up there. But things have gotten so much worse by the time that we got there, actually didn't get there. It was just too complicated. There were so many roadblocks and so many checks. It was difficult for him to do that. He's staying there preaching the gospel. His family's not there with him. He sent them out to other parts of Ukraine. But at D-O-N-E-T-S-K, look that one up. We should probably include this guy in our prayers. He is probably there continuing to try to keep the church together at personal risk of his life. So he wasn't able to come up there and be with us, but he arranged for his family members in Kyiv. He has some family members there, not all of which are Christians, but he arranged for us to meet with them. And he gave me a contact of a preacher in Kyiv. So it's interesting. It just reminds me of China. What can I say about that kind of problem? So we did. We met with the people. Now this is the preacher. His name is Alexander with a K-S. I didn't show the family members. I kind of didn't know what to do about that, so I left their pictures off. But the original contact, one of his daughters was there who had married a non-Christian, and one of their children, and then a nephew was there. This elbow right here. Remember that elbow? It's a young man about 20, I'm 19, 20 years old. I gave him one of the flash drives. I got his WhatsApp address so I could exchange with him. I didn't really expect anything to come up. It did. He exchanged information. I said, let me hear from you once in a while, and he did. And finally he writes and he says, Stan, do you know of any Christians in Lisbon, Portugal? And I said, no. Do you? And he says, yeah, my mother lives there. And his mother is there in Lisbon. The church is certainly not strong there. He said she was very dissatisfied with the church. It was charismatic. I said, if I came there, you think she and maybe some of her friends would sit around the table and talk? Yeah. He's moving there later this summer. So there may be a chance to encourage some kind of displaced Christians there. The Search for Truth that you all are probably familiar with, that is available in Russian. It wasn't available in Turkish. Available in Russian. There are the 10 flash drives. It just turned out to be a really good idea. A lot of feedback on that. We put the Dipping Church lectures on there, but more than that, Justin had some other material, things that he and Leah had written. He put on there also. And so we really loaded those folks up with some good material in English. But a lot of the people that we were meeting were learning English, so this is kind of a good exercise for them. So the Search for Truth in Russian from the World Video Bible School, they always sent stuff with me. Flash drive, and the young man was moving to listen. Sunday Assembly, there was a church. And that preacher, by the way, that I met, he says there's several sound congregations in Kyiv. And I talked about, well, probably would not feel comfortable that one that had instrumental music or a woman's preacher. He says, they're not that way in Kyiv. Maybe there's one out of the number that are there that would kind of be off in that liberal direction. So I was very encouraged about the church in Kyiv. I took a picture down the street. I guess a residential area, maybe residential, not out in the country, but not downtown either. But church building is very nice. They had remodeled an old house and taken good care of it. Good people, friendly people. I'm always interested in what do they have on their, if I visit a church in the U.S., I go look at the tract rack. What kind of tracts do they have? What do they make available to people who visit? Well, that's not exactly a tract rack, but they had quite a few materials that were there. Now, I know that some of you, including my wife, are going to think this is too much information. But if you've traveled in that part of the world, in India, as we have in other places, you know that when you go in the bathroom, there's not something you sit on, there is something you stand on. And so I have seen these things in I don't know how many different countries, either out of porcelain, out of stainless steel. I can tell you if you try to use one of those on a train in India, it's a real trick. What was different here was this thing. Usually if you've got one of these things in the floor, you've got a big pot of water in the corner and you've got a dipper. And you dip the water out and that's what you flush it with or wash it with, whatever. These people had a tank. And it has a little flush button. I had never in my life, in the places that I've been, seen this in the floor and this on the wall where you could actually press a button and flush it and you didn't have to get the little dipper out. So, moving on, probably not quite fast enough. We did. Justin taught the class. I preached. These are our names in Ukrainian, very much like Russian. It's a Cyrillic alphabet. And if you know the C sounds like an S, so there's the S-T-E-N, that's me. There is the capital lambda, if you know any Greek, L-I, and that's an A. The backwards R is an A. Leah, I got that. I guess that's Justin, but I don't know how in the world they get Justin out of that. But very friendly people, and that was our preacher that we met. When you go a place, you want to make sure you got a translator. Otherwise, things tend not to be all that interesting. So, very good place to meet the people. That was great. Now, so after Kyiv, we went back to Istanbul. And that's when we spent a little time in Istanbul. Istanbul, to the surprise of no one, it's this big, fascinating place. 16 million souls, 350 churches, 150 synagogues, 3,600 mosques. Sometimes we think we have a church building on every corner. They got a mosque on every corner. And those mosques aren't small. Some of them are huge. So there was one at the end of our street where our motel was. These are a couple of the better known. This is what is known as the Blue Mosque because of the blue tiles inside. These are just fabulous structures. They are. And that's the one that I've heard a lot, but I guess my ignorance, the one that was much more familiar was the Hagia Sophia. Hagia, holy, Sophia, wisdom. That's the name of that mosque. Google it. What can I say? Fascinating. Beautiful. Domes are huge. And what I learned too is these things are pretty at night. So when we were walking around at night, this is the same building as that, but taking a picture of it at night, they're just elegant. And every time it just bothers me a little bit that ever is made so attractive. I'll explain to you how we got our contacts in Turkey in a minute, but let me just tell you, one of them was April. That's this, where is he? It's the other old guy in the picture. Turns out he's about 10 years younger than I am, so I don't want to be calling him too old. He was fascinating. He was one of the English students, and I'll explain that in a minute. But he spent 2 full days with us being our tour guide. He's lived there, I guess, all of his life. He's a civil engineer. He worked on a lot of projects that were around there. And so he was with us when we toured some of the mosques. He was with us when we took the boat ride up and down the waterways that were there to see that. And what was interesting was our guide, we had a guide, this bridge right here, it used to be 2 miles further down the river, but they moved it up here, and Eckram says, no, it used to be 2 miles further up the river. He said, I worked for the company that did the approaches to that bridge. I know where it was, and I know where it used to be. So, it's interesting when you've got one of your friends that's carrying you around knows more than the tour guide. Other things, this thing right here is the Grand Bazaar. If you can read the print there, it says 1461. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. This is a long time before that. 55 streets in this bazaar. This bazaar, B-A-Z, bazaar, was B-I-Z, bazaar. It was just amazing. 4,600 stores. Have you ever had people coming out of 4,600 stores trying to sell you something? That's the question. But it was great that we had him be a part of that. How did we find him? Credit to Justin. When we realized we didn't really have any contacts in Turkey, Justin signed up for the World English Institute. And that's a group of people who allow those in other countries to study English, but they use the Bible as the text. And so Justin, he must have signed up for 6 or 7 or 8. You know, he was determined that we were going to have some contacts there, and it worked out beautifully. He was getting the students, so we'd have people we could talk to. It really did. It really did work out great. Well, Eckram was one of those guys. And it was delightful to spend those 2 days with him. Of course, he got to know us. Justin and Leah had an opportunity to go visit in his home with him and his wife, which we thought that was unusual. That was great. I had a lot of conversations with him, maybe because we were close to chronological peers, maybe because the science connection, his engineering and my science, really seemed to have a good rapport with him, and I encouraged him in his studies. I said, you know, when you're reading this stuff to learn the English, look at the content. Well, after we left, I got this message from him. He says, hi, Stan. And again, these people are learning English, so don't edit this. I am very appreciated to see you. I'm going to follow your advice, which you passed me 2 days ago. I mean to say I will not read Holy Book to develop my English only, but also to conceive it deeply. So he has agreed that as he reads the Word, it's not just an exercise on learning English. We're learning something about it. By the way, he says, I have started reading English. I have started reading Genesis. Other people that we met, this was somebody, he was a refugee from Iran, one of Justin's students. I don't think we would have ever found these people if Justin hadn't signed up to be a teacher at the World English Institute. And again, a person that's not a Christian probably had an opportunity to sit down and talk to more non-Christians on this trip than on any other trip that I have been on. And I thought that was pretty neat, sitting down with a refugee from Iran. And then there were 2 Christians in Iraq. They got on a plane and they flew to Istanbul to meet us while we were there. And it was just an amazing experience. 2 Christians had wonderful discussions with them. They had been taking this English course World English Institute course, studying English by studying the text of the Bible. And they decided that their email had been compromised. Of course, they're living in Iraq. They're living on the far side of Iraq. And so they were very uncomfortable with it. They quit taking the course. And I love their attitude. They had, whatever they had understood, they had obeyed. They had some inklings about the importance of baptism. They were both baptized. There were some other things that they had misunderstood, and we had a chance to kind of enlighten them about some of those. But good, God, not only intelligent, but educated people. Now, I left them with the mask. It's kind of nice. It's the only time on the journey I really appreciate the mask, because I got some pictures of them that I can show right there. And after we met them, one of the instructors of the World English Institute wrote me and says, "Oh, Stan, I have been praying for 8 years for someone to talk and encourage them in person." See, they get these students over there. And you can learn some of the facts about the Bible. But how much different is that than sitting down with somebody who's a Christian, been a Christian for a long time, kind of understands how the overall puzzle fits together? It's a wonderful opportunity. So, I think the woman who said this is going to want to send me back to some other places. Now we'll be in contact with them. You know, I've always used WhatsApp. I've talked about WhatsApp. It's end-to-end encrypted. I'll send credit card information over WhatsApp, no problem. I found out that over there in this part of the world, they use something called Signal. And it's also secure. Evidently, it's not as, it doesn't gather information on you like WhatsApp does. So I thought I had found greatest things in sliced bread in WhatsApp. Maybe Signal is the sliced bread. Okay, now, those were people that we talked to in Istanbul. Now we begin our journey south down the edge of Turkey. And so from Istanbul, we took a ferry down to Bursa. Really, this is, you know, not the city of Bursa, but it's the port. Egemen, one of Justin's English students. He agreed to come there and meet us, you know, in Bursa. And I guess he's 18, 20, 21, 22 years old, but he didn't have a car. So his father brought him. But not only did we have a chance to talk to Egemen, we had a chance to talk to his father also. A bonus contact. And again, these are students of Justin. He will continue to be in touch with him. How much greater influence is he going to be able to have on them since he has sat around the table and talked? So, what did we do? We left Istanbul, we came down to Bursa, and now I'm going to talk about the journey on down. Down from Bursa, we went to Pergamos, Smyrna, Ephesus, and Miletus. Now you may say, Stan, I think some of those names are familiar to me. Well, yes. Revelation 1:1, John was instructed, what you see, write in the book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, what we would probably call Asia Minor now, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos. There are more churches than that. Those are the only ones that we got to. But we also picked up Miletus. Kind of wanted to see that because Paul had that tearful goodbye with the Ephesian elders. So we went the ferry to Bursa, and we had a car that took us down to Smyrna, which is modern Izmir. Spent the night there. The next day, we went down to Ephesus, Miletus, back to Smyrna, and we flew out of Smyrna that evening, flew back to Istanbul. So Pergamos is now known as Pergamos. If you look for these on a map, be prepared to have to adapt to at least 1 or 2 more modern names. Smyrna is called Izmir. And we had somebody that potentially, that was where we were going to spend the night. Potentially, we had somebody we were going to be able to talk to in Izmir. I mean, Justin just did a remarkable job of getting these people. He had them scattered all over Turkey. Ephesus, Miletus. So, Pergamos. This is obviously just a model of the city. Impressive. Impressively, I mean, those buildings aren't there anymore, but you can see what they used to look like. A large complex of buildings on a very high hill. You know the love song about once on a high and windy hill? This may have been it. It was high and it was windy. Amphitheater, you see that amphitheater out in that circle there? It seats 10,000 people. Now, in the next picture, I'm going to show you what that looks like today. I have the same circle around it. I was just impressed by the height of the hill and the view and the ruins that were there. Look at that. I don't know how you sat there without sliding out of your seat. I mean, didn't know it's just like this. And Justin and Leah in their youth were having fun running up and down the steps, and he would get to the top and she'd get at the bottom. Can you hear me? The acoustics. Acoustics are just probably almost beyond the comprehension of modern science. But there was the seating capacity, the ruins around the top. The ruins were just all over the place. I just gave you a couple of pictures. Some columns, some pillars, caves, entrances. Pergamos. When you think of Pergamos in the Bible, you're not talking about some little backwater town. This thing was up on the hill. Now we think maybe that's where the big, political complex was. Maybe a lot of people didn't live on the hill. They lived, down in the valley. But that place, it was just huge. It was just huge. Pergamos. And when you start looking for it, it's going to be Pergamon, just be prepared for a lot of different names. Smyrna, known as Izmir now. I took a picture of the little sign. It says, one of the treasures of Turkey is the Izmir Agora. And by now you know what an Agora is. It's a market, Agora Parkway, down by the Forum, right? And look what they did here. I've got a feeling the place just got all torn apart. It looks like what they did is they just gathered up the stones that had been a part of it, and they just, kind of stacked them. There's not, maybe with the exception of right there, you see some columns over there, and this archway is pretty neat. But with the exception of that, I don't think things are put back in any kind of place like they might have been in ancient times. They were just piled in there to save where we could see them. But that was one of their markets. It'd be nice if it had some structure. It would be easier to imagine the people running up and down through there, buying their fresh tomatoes for their fruit salad and all that. So, Smyrna. Ephesus. This is the biggest of the deals right here. When we got there, I didn't know, but as the guide explained it, evidently they were like Ephesus 1, Ephesus 2, Ephesus 3. I mean, these cities have been there for so long, they would evolve. I mean, if you studied about Jerusalem, you know that the city as it grew evolved in different directions. Same thing for these. Evidently, Ephesus 1 was so old, it was probably there and gone by the time the Apostle Paul visited Ephesus. Ephesus 2, I have right here, that was Ephesus 2, was the area with the temple to Diana. They call that Ephesus 2. Most of the people, the temple was still around at the time of Paul. Most of the city population had moved into this area known as Ephesus 3. So the temple to Diana or Artemis was still there, and I'll show you some ruins from it. But this is probably where the people live. Notice, if you will, this road. See the seaport? This is a depiction, I guess, of what things would have been probably at about the time of Paul. There is the seaport. There is the road up to the big theater. Well, I'm going to show you the road and show you the theater. There is the road, and this was the theater. The road led from the seaport to Ephesus. It's lined with shops. If you can see these little columns or pillars, imagine little kiosks, if you will, shops in each one of those. That was the way it was in many other places. When I had a chance to visit ancient Corinth, you could see a wall, a street down which almost certainly the Apostle Paul walked. And it was that. It was those little cubby holes for the different shops that existed, but very much like this. And there's the theater. It was like, it's hard to tie anything down exactly. But the feeling is this was the theater that Demetrius started to riot in because of Paul's preaching. And because of his preaching, those who were selling articles for Diana, goddess Diana, the Ephesians, they felt like he was hurting their business. And I guess if you start preaching against idols, I guess those who want the duplicates of the idol, I guess that business would kind of go down. But anyhow, Ephesus 3, there's the street. Now this If you look at the history books, or you look at the modern books about Ephesus, this is probably the thing you see most often. This was a library, the library of Celsius, not Celsius, the temperature, but this. And again, did it survive like that? Probably not. They have reconstructed it. They reconstructed it in a couple of ways. There's some of the artifacts just that were so fantastic. They took them away to some museum. So what they did was they created a duplicate, a copy of it, to plug it in where it belongs in this. And sometimes those are just reconstructions. And I don't know if you can get this, but you see this thing right here? That's it down there. So we had a chance to walk down this street, if you can figure out where the street is. Steep and slippery street, all the way down to there. So that was kind of fascinating. This over here is a couple of the gates to the city. But that's Ephesus. And that library evidently was an extremely famous library at the time. When you left to see it with all the, I'm going to say books on the shelves, but I guess that's not right? The scrolls on the shelf. Or whatever they had for shelves. This would be back in the other part of Ephesus. This is the remains of the temple of Diana, goddess of the Ephesians. Temple of Diana, temple of Artemis, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And this, I've got this quote up here. When they thought that their business was being interrupted by Paul's teaching against the idolatry, now when they, that is the people of the city or the artisans who were making these things, now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Did that for a couple of hours. Maybe it almost sounds like they did it for a good couple of hours and took a break and started it again. There's the remains of the temple. That pillar right there, that column is the only column that's left. And I'm not sure whether it survived upright or whether they reconstituted it there. This was one of the 7 wonders of the world. And when I saw that, you know what I thought about? What's the old poem, Osmandius? I am great Osmandius, I'm the king of all I survey. And by the time people got there, all that was left was the sign, the statue was gone. That's the way the things of the world go. They decay, they fall apart, they rot. But God's still there.
Amen.
Miletus, I don't know that we think a lot about Miletus. Miletus, we talked about in the other city, a stadium that seated, or a theater that seated 10,000. This one seated 15,000 people. It's not mentioned in the Bible, but Paul went to Miletus. He was there. He met with the Ephesian elders. It's kind of hard to believe he would have missed a 15,000 seat theater. Now, at Miletus, they have some idea where the port was, and they think it was in this area where it was the main port at the time of Paul. This was the main port, probably where Paul had that cheerful goodbye. I put the scripture up here. From Miletus, Paul sent to Ephesus and called for the elders of the church, and then they all went freely. He fell on Paul's neck and kissed him. Somewhere in that area, maybe. So thank you. Thank you for your prayers. A lot of times the prayers were for the journey and the safety on the journey. This time I ask you to pray for opportunities. And I tell you, if you ever doubted the effectiveness of prayer, look at the opportunities that we had. We had opportunities in Ukraine, Istanbul. We talked to people from Turkey. We talked to people from Iran. We talked to people from Iraq. Versa, we talked to somebody from the local Turkey area. So thank you. Thank you for all your encouragement in many ways. A final thought, and I stole this from Justin. He had a slide like this. This is one of the streets of Pergamos. They were great street builders. He says, our first century brethren walked these streets in Pergamos. There were martyrs there. Some of them died, but others remained faithful and remained. Some died, some stood for the truth and died for it. Others compromised the truth. As he pointed out, that's kind of the 2 opportunities we have. Are we going to stand for the truth? We know that in our lifetime, especially some of you who are younger, the truth is going to be challenged in this country like it hasn't maybe in generations. we don't make the choice, if we don't make the commitment, that we are going to be faithful no matter what the cost, we may go the way that somebody else did. Whose step will we follow? If you're trying to follow in the steps of the Lord and instruct in some way, if there's some way you think some of us here could help you, we would be delighted to try to do that if you'll come forward as we sing.
Has the